Hello, kiddos. Mr. John here today with Chapter 13, Lesson 3, aptly titled War with Mexico. Guess what we're going to learn about today? Our essential question for today is, why did the U.S. want New Spain, and how did they get it? Hint, hint, there's going to be some fighting. Let's get into it, shall we? So, oh boy, more war. I wonder if Mexico knew it was in trouble with the United States right next door. Those darn Americans and their manifest destiny. They swallow up land in North America like an all-consuming horde. In the last lesson, we learned that President James Polk finally had Texas admitted into the Union as a state. That was the appetizer. Time for the main course, the rest of New Mexico with a side of California. Here's how I imagine the U.S. viewing New Mexico and Cali. Good. So, a little background, and then the war starts. In the 1800s, New Mexico contained much more of what it does now. It was basically all the land between Texas and California. It was called New Spain, and then we're going to see how it turns into New Mexico. So, the Spanish had moved into this whole region in the 1500s. They were like the first colonizers of the Americas. Spanish conquistadors had pretty much rolled in and subdued the native populations. The Spanish founded the city of Santa Fe all the way back in 1610. It's chilling around here somewhere. Mexico broke free of Spain, however, in 1821, and this changed things. Spain had worked to keep Americans out of Santa Fe, but Mexico welcomed the trade. A guy by the name of William Becknell was the first American trader to reach Santa Fe. He blazed a trail from the westernmost edge of the United States to Santa Fe, and this became known as the Santa Fe Trail. Right? Makes sense. Seems appropriate. Anyways, it became well known and utilized trail for many Americans to follow west. As a result, American settlers crept in and soon believed New Mexico was a part of manifest destiny. Now let's bump over into California's Spanish culture. Spanish explorers and missionaries set up shop in Cali, California in the 1700s. A chain of missions was built all along the west coast. And now this is where things get hazy because the book really glosses over this. So Mr. Yun's going to give you the real version of history. Here's what really happened. The Spanish basically enslaved the natives in these missions and forced them to do agricultural labor under the guise of converting them to Christianity. In the book it says that they built missions to convert the natives and taught them to farm. It was more like an occupation where the natives were forced to work and also forced to convert. The crimes against natives by the Spanish are comparable to those of crimes of the United States against the native populations in the East. And that's basically all I'm going to say about it. The large agricultural missions of Spanish California changed when New Spain became New Mexico in 1821. So it now becomes no longer belonging to Spain, it belongs to Mexico, which basically made its own country. The missions became ranchos run by rancheros. So now they're large-scale ranches ran by ranchers. As it was before, the natives were essentially slave labor. In the 1840s, Americans started reaching California. They found the climate mild and pleasing, and the soil fertile. At this point, you know it's only a matter of time. Americans lock on the fertile soil like flies lock on a garbage. Americans knew that having ports on the west coast would be pretty great too. Alright, let's get ready to rumble. The stage is set. So we've got all the context now. Let's get to the fight. President Polk wanted California and New Mexico for the United States, and if Mexico wasn't going to sell it, we would take it by force. The trick was getting Mexico to strike first and make them look like the bad guys. So before that trickery, though, Polk did try to buy those lands. He offered $30 million for California and New Mexico, but Mexico refused this offer. Now, keep in mind that relations between these countries was not good. We might describe it as frosty. Mexico was still salty about losing Texas, and there was now a border dispute between what was the border of Texas and Mexico. Mexico claimed that the Mexico-Texas border was the Nueces River, which is right here, and the U.S. claimed that it was the Rio Grande River. So that's a pretty big chunk of land that we're arguing about here, because here's the Nueces, here's the Rio Grande. Texas is much smaller if it's just the Nueces River. Rio Grande River, though, that's a lot more. So as I mentioned, that's a pretty big chunk of disputed land. Well, Polk knew how to start a fight. He sent a U.S. military force under the command of Zachary Taylor into this disputed area and pretty much parked them there. Mexico saw it as an invasion of their Mexican territory and attacked this U.S. force. Polk goes to Congress and says, we have U.S. military forces being attacked in U.S. territory. Mexico kind of did the same thing to their people, and both were kind of right and both were kind of wrong, I guess, but it was a crafty move by Polk. Regardless of whose fault it was, war was declared. Now, the U.S. had a three-step plan for victory. Number one, drive Mexican forces out of Texas, so drive them out of the disputed land. Seize New Mexico and California, and then step 3 was capture Mexico City, the Mexican capital. Zachary Taylor and General Stephen Kearny basically had Texas and New Mexico locked up by 1847. It didn't take them long. Next up, California. California was actually a hotbed of problems for Mexico already. Americans in Mexican California had already begun revolting and overthrowing the weak Mexican governance. So they basically didn't have a very strong grasp on Mexico. In April of 1846, Americans in California declared independence from Mexico and renamed themselves the Bear Flag Republic. So California was its own country, but not for very long, because American warships arrived all the way around to the Pacific Ocean within a month. And then California was simply assimilated into the United States of America. By this point, Mexico was in pretty bad shape, but refused to surrender, and it was time for step 3 of the American game plan, take Mexico City. An American force led by General Winfield Scott landed at the port of Veracruz, not far from Mexico City. In the span of 6 months, they fought their way from Veracruz all the way into Mexico City, where they captured it. Alright, let's talk about peace terms, or more like you got your butt kicked terms. Mexico was forced to surrender on February 2nd, 1848, and they got the short end of the stick. They basically surrendered all the land that the U.S. wanted, which was California, New Mexico, Texas, and what would become Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and even parts of other states. You can see these areas called the Mexican Cession right here on this map. What did Mexico get, you ask? Well, the USA assumed about $3.5 million in debt that the Mexican government owed U.S. citizens living in these territories. So Mexico was off the hook for that grain. The USA also paid Mexico $15 million, basically in damages for the war, and that was it. Mexico lost big time. As is typically when you lose a war, you usually lose out big. Never really turns out well for the losers. With that Mexican cession, the U.S. pretty much realized their goal of manifest destiny. There's a little bit of land, like the Gadsden Purchase down here, but I don't even think we talk about it in this course, but basically, that shapes the continental United States into what it is today. Manifest destiny achieved. Alright, on our very next page, we have our little quizzy wizzy. It's your basic Yun quiz. 5 questions, 10 points. That's it. We have lesson 4 tomorrow. Going to talk about Joseph Smith and the Mormons, and a little bit more on California, a little bit on Utah. I think that's actually what it's called, California and Utah. Yep, I believe we get into the 1949 gold rush, but for now, knock out that quiz. We'll get on it on our next day classes. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day.